One of the states that has said it will go to court is Virginia. Mark Herring is the state's attorney general, and he is in Richmond. Attorney General Herring, thank you very much for joining us. The Trump administration says what it's doing will help the American economy. It says, as you heard, the Obama-era standards were going to cost consumers more per car.
No, that's nonsense. Judy, the Trump administration, time and again, has shown an incredible capacity to follow really bad public policy and oftentimes do it in an illegal way. And what they've announced today is unfortunately another example. Climate change is real. And here in Virginia, we see the effects of that with more severe weather. In Hampton Roads, for example, in southeastern Virginia, they deal with nuisance flooding frequently. Even the world's largest naval base at Norfolk faces billions of dollars in additional costs as a result of sea level rise. And one of the best things that we can do as a nation to help make sure that we have clean air and a safe planet is to make sure that we maintain fuel efficiency standards. And what the Trump administration is doing in trying to roll those back is it's going to cost hundreds of billions of dollars more at the pump. It's going to result in dirtier air and cost communities all across the country more money in dealing with the cost of climate change.
Well, what about the cost argument, though, Mr. Herring? They're saying this will add, what the Obama-era regulations would do is ultimately add around an average of $2,300 more per vehicle.
No, and their evidence is flimsy. It's not supported by the data. Even the car companies say this is a ridiculous idea. If the Trump administration is successful in rolling these back, it's actually going to cost Americans an estimated $1,600 a year at the pumps. It's going to result in tens of millions of metric tons of CO2 into the atmosphere. And what the Trump administration is doing is wrong, and it's going to hurt us.
They also argue that this is a safer move because they say under the Obama era, tougher standards, people would drive more and therefore there would be more car accidents, more deaths.
And that's just not logical. The truth is the Obama era rule that was put into place was done in a very deliberative manner with a lot of input, with a lot of study, and that evidence, the scientific evidence and data showed that those standards could be implemented, that they can be done safely, and that it will make our air cleaner and cost Americans less at the pumps.
Mr. Herring, Mr. Attorney General, let me ask you, though, about a number of critics have said, even when the Obama-era regulations were put in place, there were arguments that this is really unrealistic to try to hit 50 miles a gallon fuel efficiency in the time frame they had set out, that was never going to happen, that the auto manufacturers weren't going to be able to meet that.
You know, there have been instances in the past where we've heard concerns that, oh, well, maybe the technology won't be there. But whenever the standards have been set, companies have been able to adjust and been able to meet the standards when they're needed. And so after a lot of careful thought, the rules need to be allowed to go into effect. It'll be good for Americans because they'll pay less at the pumps. The cars will be more fuel efficient. They'll be cleaner and help meet our objectives on climate change.
Finally, you mentioned the auto manufacturers. Their Auto Manufacturers Association put out a statement today asking, they're saying it's going to be very difficult for them to come up with standards for in other words, two different set of standards, one for some states, another one for the federal government and other states. They're asking the states to work this out with the Trump administration to come up with what they call a common sense solution. Is that possible?
Well, this is the beginning of the announcement of the proposed rule. So it'll take a period of some time, perhaps months, for the rules to go through the administrative process. During that time, we'll be working to provide a lot of information and rationale for why what they're trying to do is a bad idea. So I would hope that they would take a look at that and consider it. And, you know, states should have the right to be able to have strict fuel efficiency standards. But hopefully the Trump administration will realize what they're proposing is not a good idea as this public process goes forward.
The Virginia Attorney General, Mark Herring, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
We invited Republican leaders from several states to appear tonight, but none was able to join us. But Americans for Prosperity, which is the libertarian advocacy group backed by the conservative billionaire Charles Koch, has been opposed to the Obama rules and applauded today's move. Mary Kate Hopkins is the group's policy manager, and she joins me now. Mary Kate Hopkins, welcome. You just heard Virginia's Attorney General say what the administration is doing is bad for the environment, just at a moment when climate change is becoming a greater and greater concern. The administration is going in the wrong direction.
Well, what we at AFP are concerned about, what our activists are concerned about, are really the impacts on consumers and how to balance that with the impacts on the environment. So we're focused on the extraordinary rate at which the CAFE standards have increased the cost of vehicles in the United States and really priced average Americans out of the new car market, and really to the negligible impact on the environment, as even the Obama administration admitted when they finalized their rule.
So your argument is that it would not have a significant effect on the environment to roll back? In other words, to keep the efficiency standards where they are now?
Correct, yes. And what they would be doing is freezing them at the 2020 level. So not rolling anything back, simply not making it any worse. And yes, the analysis that accompanied the rule that was released today said that it would have really a negligible impact on the future, maybe 1/1000th of a degree Celsius over the next 80 or so years in terms of global temperatures.
So all the, we heard the Attorney General refer to all the data, the evidence that went into coming up with these regulations during the Obama presidency. You're saying that didn't amount to anything?
Well, and it even, under the previous administration, they said that their entire slew of CAFE standards that over the course of 15 years would only have an impact of 2/100ths of a degree Celsius. That accompanied their rule back in 2010.
What about the cost argument? We hear the argument that you started out bringing up, which is the cost of the individual car. The average is going to go up under the Obama era rules. Attorney General Herring and others are saying that's not really the case. It's going to be overridden by an increase ultimately in the cost of gasoline, and that people will be paying more than what did he say, $1,600 more a year at the pump.
Right, and that's an argument we've seen from supporters of this mandate. What they're not telling you is that the underlying cost increase on vehicles is much higher. We've seen to this point an increase of about $2,300 per vehicle due to the CAFE standards to this point, and there are projections that put that number at over $7,000 a vehicle if we were to keep the standards in place for 2025 as they're set to go now.
Let me go back to the environmental argument here. Even if it's a small improvement in the environment, isn't it worth it? I think would be the argument of those on the other side of this, that isn't it worth it to take some steps to think that we're doing something's being done to protect the environment for all people?
Right, and the way we see it, the way our activists see it, this is a government mandate. We have to weigh the costs and benefits. If someone, if we were able to see that this would have a significant benefit that outweighs the cost, maybe that would change the conversation. But at this point, the costs are so significant and so high and so impactful on American families that they truly outweigh the benefits. And keep in mind also that our greenhouse gas emissions in the United States are on a downward trend already.
To that point, scientists, though, are saying they see emissions overall as being far greater than what is healthy, what is good for society. They see the trend as going in a dangerous direction.
Right, and what we can say to that is we are on a downward trajectory. We are improving. Things have improved over the past few decades. We're not going to solve this problem in a day. If we try to make our mandate so strong that it essentially stops people from driving, that halts our economy. It keeps people from their jobs. I guess the question is, what costs are we willing to pay? And we think that we can find a reasonable balance between being stewards of our environment and also allowing people to live their everyday lives, to succeed, to prosper, and to use their vehicle to travel around as needed. So we'd like to strike a balance on that.
The auto manufacturers, they don't seem particularly enthusiastic about what the Trump administration has announced. They're saying today, we'll try to work this out, but they don't like the idea of two different sets of standards. It's clear they were already moving in the direction of trying to come up with more fuel-efficient cars. So when you don't have the auto manufacturers themselves on your side. What does that say?
Well, I think that, yes, they don't want to have to change when they've already been preparing for a certain rule, but there's enough lead time if they're freezing it at 2020 levels. There's a little bit of time for these manufacturers to kind of adjust their plans. Also, when manufacturers are talking about kind of having two different standards, a lot of what they're referring to is whether it's a national standard or a state-based standard, whether we allow states to create their own standards. And so what the Trump administration is also doing, along with freezing the CAFE standards, is limiting the extent to which states can impose regulations on other states and on manufacturers.
Mary Kate Hopkins with Americans for Prosperity, thank you very much.
Thank you.